No one can deny that Super Mario Odyssey was objectively just a great game all around, but obviously that doesn't mean it's without its flaws. There are quite a few areas of the game that need to be tweaked or modified slightly, and I've even addressed a few of them in previous videos. But the purpose of this video today is to take a more critical look at the game and closely examine its gameplay, mechanics, and progression, and discuss how they can be improved upon. Many games have actually done this before, and it's something we're all familiar with: sequels. Today marks the beginning of a new series on this channel titled Creating the Best Sequel, a show where we aim to take a deep dive into the design of our favorite games and discuss what could be done to create the greatest sequel possible. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the first episode with Super Mario Odyssey. The main attention grabber of Odyssey when it was revealed to the world was the return to a more open-ended approach to progression. We hadn't really seen this since Super Mario 64, where you could technically collect any of the stars in the level, even if you weren't on the corresponding mission, beside a few exceptions. Odyssey expanded further upon this idea by essentially throwing out the mission system entirely with their use of kingdoms in the game. Once you reached a kingdom, you were basically free to explore it and find moons at your own pace, and in your own order. However, there were cases where later areas of a kingdom were locked off until you completed a story moon, such as not being able to enter the Sand Kingdom's inverted pyramid until you completed the story moon with the Moais. I personally think that this approach to story progression in general is a solid way to go when creating a game as open-ended as this one. They contributed to world building in big ways because you could see the environment of the kingdom change around you after completing these specific moons, with the citizens of the kingdom having their problems solved, or even something as simple as the time of day changing. In most cases even, the story moons weren't even required to continue on to the next kingdom. As long as you had enough stocked up to power the Odyssey, you could take off to the next area, further reiterating on the more open nature of the game. However, this specific mechanic is where my first problem arises. The moons required to leave a kingdom must be collected in that specific kingdom. So, for example, if you were to collect 30 moons in Sand Kingdom, of which you only need 16 to move on, and you leave that kingdom and head for Lake, of which you only need 8 to move on, you'd think you'd be able to use the leftover moons you collected in Sand to just skip Lake and move on to the next kingdom. You are in a huge hurry to save the princess after all, so this would be great to streamline your path to her. But you simply can't do it. You are forced to collect the 8 moons inside of Lake Kingdom before you can move on. In my opinion at least, I think it would improve upon the game's open-ended aspect by giving the player this freedom. People like to play games their own way, and if something makes sense for the player to do, they would expect that they would be able to do it. Players are very appreciative of the satisfaction that comes along with completing a task in a game in a way that seems a little unorthodox or not necessarily intended by the developer. And like I said, this improves upon the open nature of the game. Obviously, this doesn't mean that this principle can be universally applied to all of a sudden make a game better. This type of freedom only really works in these scenarios, and putting them in any other type of game is more likely to just cause confusion than anything. Speaking of kingdoms though, my next point of concern involves them as well. There are a grand total of 14 real kingdoms throughout the game to explore. I say real because I am not counting Cloud Kingdom, Ruined Kingdom, Dark Side, or Darker Side, as the amount of moons in those kingdoms are minimal, and some of them really just served as glorified boss arenas. Though I personally think that the amount of kingdoms should have been a bit more than 14. I am not saying that they should have increased the moon count. That's an irrational request to make given how many moons are in this game. But throughout my journey to 100%, some of the bigger kingdoms, such as Sand, Luncheon, and Wooded, started to feel quite stale once I finished collecting every moon in them. These kingdoms all are approaching 100 total moons each, and the small variety and changes of scenery throughout these kingdoms started to wear on me towards the end of my time there. I would propose that it would be best, at least in my opinion, to expand the amount of total kingdoms in a sequel, with the amount of moons in each being lowered slightly to compensate. This would greatly help with keeping the environment the player is in feeling fresh and new for as long as possible, and it's always exciting to travel to a new area in any scenario in a video game. And yes, I know that creating these extra kingdoms will require more development resources, as more graphics, sounds, music, etc. need to be made. But this show is about creating the best sequel, so those types of restrictions are more in the back of my mind when brainstorming for these types of videos. On the other hand, I know that there will be some people that are opposed to the idea of increasing the kingdom count. So let me offer up a new idea to you that may also solve the same problem. What if, instead of each kingdom being confined to one exclusive theme throughout, it expanded upon its own world by adding new and unique looking areas to explore that still fit with the overall feel of the kingdom? We can kind of see this idea being utilized in Wooded, with the area known as the Deep Woods, where it's much darker and moody than the rest of the kingdom above. This area was a very welcome surprise when I first discovered it, and I would have loved to see way more kingdoms expand upon their locale in this way. The only other examples of this idea being used that I can think of is the inside of the pyramid and frozen underground in Sand Kingdom, as well as the Moon Cave. Let me know if I missed any, but my main point is that it simply doesn't happen enough to keep some areas from feeling stale or samey. What if the cave-like area carved into the mountain and seaside was expanded upon to go completely underground into a small cave system, with moons and challenges throughout? Or there could be a kitchen area in Luncheon Kingdom that the cockatiel could have used, and Mario would have to infiltrate the kitchen before he was able to get into the pot with the boss. I've stressed upon the importance of world building in video games before, and this one is no exception. On top of building and expanding on the world, you are also, like I said earlier, keeping the scenery fresh for the player, so it ends up being a win-win if executed correctly. Now, let's talk about coins. As discussed in my last video, the concept of coins as actual currency was really fleshed out in this entry to the 3D Mario series, and essentially replaced the live system entirely. However, if you've been paying even the slightest bit of attention to what this video is about, you might have guessed that I think coins as a mechanic are not fleshed out enough. To avoid myself going in circles for my last video, I'll keep the basic explanation of coins in this game minimal. You can go watch that video if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about them being used in place of lives. Today, we're going to be talking about their value as currency, and to be honest, they don't have much real value, at least if you're talking about an overall sense of progression. Let me explain. As you may know, coins in Odyssey are used to purchase three things: moons, life-up hearts, and cosmetic outfits for Mario. Technically, you could say that the purple coins could also be used to buy decorations for the Odyssey, and also one outfit per kingdom, but I would consider those much more as collectibles than I do currency. But with real coins, that's it. That's all that is available to buy. Personally, I think that buying moons, at least in this way, is quite pointless, but we'll get to that later. I never once bought a life-up heart from the shop either, as the game is not that difficult, and a life-up heart was also usually already provided to me right before any area that I may have needed one. So I guess their only use in this case would be for more casual players who needed some assistance or peace of mind when playing. Then, that leaves the cosmetic outfits, which I'm completely fine with being in the game, especially Nipple Mario. However, these outfits really are the only thing you can dump very large amounts of your currency on. The value of these coins never really provides the player with a real sense of progression. I would love to see coins utilized in new and different ways in a potential sequel. What if shops had even less of an emphasis in the game, and instead coins were valuable all over the place? For example, instead of all the moons that were bought with coins being purchased in an arbitrary shop that was common to each kingdom, moons could otherwise be available by paying NPCs around the kingdom the player is currently in. This would help expand upon world building, as the NPC may have some story to tell as to how they got the moon, and upon realizing the value of it, would charge you for the item. Or, the NPC you meet may not have the moon in their possession, but offer to tell you where one is for a small payment. Now, obviously this couldn't be done often, as that would get really stale and honestly quite annoying. Moderation would be key in this situation, and it would be a nice surprise for anyone who stumbled across it, as they would actually feel some value in all the coins they collected up until that point. Additionally, coins could be used to lock off certain areas of kingdoms. An NPC similar to a bouncer outside of a club or a guard of a private area could not allow entry until you paid a fee. Different ways to utilize coins could be talked about for quite a while, but those are just a few suggestions. If you've got any more, feel free to leave them in the comments below. One more thing about coins though. Let's talk about the criteria for 100% completion in this game for a minute. I know the majority of players won't go for true 100%, but it involves a lot of coins, so I'm going to include it here. To fully complete this game, you must collect all 999 power moons, 119 of which are purchased from a shop for 100 coins each, costing a total of 11,900 coins for those who didn't want to do the math. You must then capture every enemy, hear every music track, collect every single purple coin, buy every decoration and souvenir for the Odyssey, touch all 85 checkpoint flags, and finally, buy every single cosmetic outfit item in the game, of which there are 47 hats and 48 outfits to buy, costing you a grand total of coins in the tens of thousands. So the only real value of coins you collect is actually locked behind hours of grinding for currency, only to get that special little star on your profile. I hope you're beginning to see the problem here. This extra criteria, tacked onto the completion checklist, makes it seem like the purpose of coins were an afterthought, don't you think? I think that they got to the end of development, we're starting to feel lazy, and we're like, those coins really do not have much value, do they? Oh no, they really don't, but we could just lock the last 100 plus main collectibles behind a price tag and then severely jack up the price of some of those outfits to make up for it. That seems good enough for me. And sure, some may argue that this doesn't matter since it's optional content, but I would argue that one would want a game to be enjoyable all the way through, and not just the main story. There are plenty of people that finish the story and want more, and they'll get more in this case, for quite a bit, until they hit that point I just mentioned, and boy are they in for a rude awakening. It's just not fun to run through the same sub-area in Bowser's Kingdom over and over again just to get the amount of coins you need. Okay, enough complaining. Let's talk about some solutions to these problems. After all, this is creating the best sequel, and not whining about games made for children for unhealthy amounts of time. So, for the issue of having to buy the last 119 moons in the game, there are several ways to go about solving this. The first one, and the most sensible, being to just subtract all those moons from the total moon count entirely. Look, I get it, 999 moons is a very cool number, but is it really worth it? The word afterthought comes back to mind here. Those final moons come off as a big fat afterthought, and not substantial completionist content. So just remove them entirely. They're unnecessary. However, another solution, if you wanted to keep 999 as the total number of moons, could be simply to add more unique moons into the game. This obviously would take more development resources, and the game is already huge enough without the extra shop moons at the end. So that's why I'm a bit hesitant on the suggestion. Either way, it's a solution nonetheless. As for the outfits, the solution should be pretty obvious. Lower the prices. There are multiple outfits that cost 9,999 coins, and a lot of others that are 3,000 to 5,000 coins. If the player wants to buy every single outfit, there is no way they can afford all these without monotonous grinding. I understand that the super expensive outfits are some of the coolest in the game, but the prices are way too high to even warrant that much mindless work. I believe the most expensive outfit should only be around 5,000 coins, with the others being adjusted accordingly. This would help balance out the currency in the case of cosmetics much better than the current situation. And honestly, that's all I have to say about Super Mario Odyssey. Like I said earlier, there isn't that much wrong with this game. The mechanics of the movement and controls feel great, the world building is quite good as always for a 3D Mario game, and most importantly, it's fun. Very fun. But because of my love for this game, I wanted to make this video to simply point out the few small tweaks here and there to make it the best game it can be. It's a big reason why I think a sequel could be such a good idea. Following the same type of sequel structure that Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 had, keeping the same engine and adding a few new mechanics here and there to keep the gameplay fresh, as well as fixing what may have been wrong in the previous game. That's the one thing that a sequel to Odyssey would need on top of the nitpicks I mentioned earlier, something fresh and new. fresh new kingdoms, fresh new captures, fresh new outfits, and fresh new challenges for moons. Or who knows, they may not even be moons next time.